My name is Olivia Carter. I am 29 years old, a software entrepreneur living in Seattle, Washington. For the past 2 years, I believed I was building a life with the man of my dreams, Daniel Whitmore. We were just 3 days from saying our vows when his parents invited me to their estate for tea. I thought it was a chance to bond before the wedding. Instead, they slid a thick prenuptial agreement across the table and gave me a choice. Sign it immediately or the wedding was off. They had no idea that behind my modest apartment and practical car lay a fortune of my own, and a truth that would turn their smug confidence into stunned silence. If you have ever been underestimated or blindsided by people who thought they knew your worth, tell me in the comments. And if you enjoy stories where the tables turn, make sure you subscribe so you do not miss what happens next. I had always imagined the week before my wedding would be filled with final fittings, last-minute menu tastings, and quiet moments of anticipation. Instead, I found myself driving through the winding roads of Lakewood Heights toward the towering gates of the Whitmore estate. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the manicured hedges, and for a moment, I felt small against the grandeur of it all. Daniel's parents had called that morning with an invitation for tea. His mother, Evelyn, had sounded unusually warm, her voice softened by something I couldn't quite name. "It will be nice to have some time together, just the three of us," she had said. I told myself it was a good sign. After all, Evelyn had never shown more than polite interest in me since the day we met. As I pulled into the circular driveway, the reality of their world surrounded me. The Whitmore's mansion rose like a monument to old money. Limestone walls, wrought iron balconies, and an entrance flanked by columns taller than any tree in my neighborhood. Daniel's father, Charles, was a prominent figure in law and business circles, and Evelyn was known for her influence in high society philanthropy. Together, they were a force in Seattle's elite, the kind of couple whose presence alone could tilt a room's balance of power. The housekeeper, Marina, opened the door before I had even knocked, as if my arrival had been anticipated to the second. She led me not to the sunlit conservatory where Evelyn usually entertained guests, but to the formal drawing room. Heavy drapes dimmed the daylight, and the polished mahogany table in the center gleamed under the chandelier. Evelyn and Charles were already seated, their posture impeccable, their expressions unreadable. Evelyn's dress was a deep sapphire, perfectly tailored, the kind of fabric that whispered wealth. Charles wore a charcoal suit and the kind of cufflinks that were less accessory and more declaration. Between them sat a leather-bound folder, its spine perfectly aligned with the edge of the table. "Olivia," Evelyn greeted, her smile precise but distant. "Thank you for joining us." She gestured to the chair opposite them. I sat, my pulse quickening for reasons I couldn't yet define. Charles spoke first, his voice even and deliberate. "We thought it wise to settle certain matters before the wedding." He reached for the folder, opened it, and slid a thick stack of papers toward me. "This is a prenuptial agreement." I blinked at the document, the neat rows of legal text a stark contrast to the delicate china teacups beside it. Evelyn's voice followed, smoother than silk yet carrying an edge. "It is standard for our family. We would like you to sign it today." The words hung in the air, cold and sharp. I didn't reach for the papers. Instead, I looked from one face to the other, searching for some hint of kindness, of reason. Evelyn sipped her tea without meeting my gaze. Charles simply folded his hands, as though the matter were already settled. "May I have time to review this with my own counsel?" I asked, my voice steady despite the storm building in my chest. Charles shook his head with the smallest of movements. "We believe it is best handled now. The wedding is in 3 days, and we prefer to avoid any unnecessary complications." Evelyn set down her cup with a soft click. "Olivia, you must understand, this is about protecting the Whitmore legacy. Sign it and we can all move forward. Refuse." Her pause was deliberate. "And there will be no wedding." I felt the blood drain from my face, my heart pounding so loudly I wondered if they could hear it. My fingers brushed the edge of the folder, but I didn't open it. Somewhere deep inside something shifted, Not just shock or anger, but a spark of resolve. They thought they knew me. They thought I was powerless. They were about to find out how wrong they were. When I stepped back into the gray light outside the Whitmore mansion, the air felt colder than it had when I arrived. Something about the world had shifted, as if the clouds had gathered while I was inside and decided to stay. I held the leather folder the way one might hold a live wire, careful not to let it touch too much of me. The stone steps echoed under my heels, each footfall a small rehearsal for the decisions I knew were coming. I did not cry until the gates closed behind me. Not a flood, just a quiet spill that blurred the trees into long green smears and made the asphalt look like a river. I parked beneath a line of cedars along the shoulder and folded my hands on the steering wheel. My wedding was 3 days away. My dress hung in a garment bag by the bedroom window where the light caught it in the mornings. The seating chart was printed. The vows were drafted in a neat stack on my desk. All of it had felt fragile and bright. Now every piece trembled. I wiped my eyes, pulled my breath together and drove. Downtown rose in glass and steel, steady and indifferent, which was exactly what I needed. I took the long way to my apartment, hoping the miles would sandpaper the sting from my skin. The city could do that when I wanted it to. It could take anything raw and turn it opaque, or at least manageable. Inside, I placed the folder on the kitchen counter and stood over it like a surgeon about to make a first incision. My phone buzzed. Daniel. I let it ring until the sound stopped. I was not ready to hear his voice softened by that lawyerly calm he used when he wanted someone to stop resisting. The silence after the ring faded left me with the hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the wall clock. It was almost cruel how ordinary those sounds felt. I made tea, set the cup down, and finally opened the folder. Legal text stacked in dense paragraphs, tidy and merciless. Terms for separation. Terms for ownership. Terms for my work, spelled out as if my ideas could be boxed and relabeled with another family's crest. I traced one clause with my finger, the one that addressed intellectual property generated during the marriage, and felt a slow heat climb my throat. My company might be measured in lines of code and school contracts, but it was built from years of study, from late nights and early mornings, from a grandfather's legacy and a promise I had made to myself. I was not going to sign it away for a house with a bigger driveway. I called Jenna. The moment she recognized my voice, her breath sharpened. I told her what had happened, not rushing, not dramatizing it, just laying it out as if reading a report. By the time I finished, the quiet on the line felt heavy. Say the word, she said, and I will be at your door. You do not have to, I told her. Though the truth was I wanted someone who knew me in rooms where I might forget myself. I am already in the elevator, she said. She was. 10 minutes later, she stepped inside with her hair still damp from the rain and a bag of pastries she must have grabbed without thinking. She looked at the folder the way I had looked at it. She poured herself tea and sat across from me with her arms folded. This is not a contract, she said. It is a cage. He nodded. I do not intend to crawl into it. Then do not, she said. But do not let this become a story where they decide the ending because you stayed quiet. I told her my plan in pieces as it formed. I would call Harold, the attorney who had handled my grandfather's estate, and who knew that the careful girl in a thrifted blazer had grown into a woman who built a company. I would not show up in a trembling panic with an open pen. I would not let anyone rush me. If they wanted a document, they would get a document that honored both sides. Jenna leaned forward. And Daniel, she asked, what is he going to do when you stand your ground? He will have to decide, I said. The words tasted like metal, but they were true. I was tired of guessing where he stood only to discover I had been wrong. I called Harold. He answered on the second ring. His voice warm but all business. When I explained the situation, he made a sound that landed somewhere between disapproval and resolve. Bring it to my office, he said. We will carve it up and build something that cannot be twisted. Be here at 7. I slept in pieces that night, waking to drafts of thought that would not settle. Each time I closed my eyes, I saw the blue stone of Evelyn's ring and the tidy way she had set down her teacup before giving me the ultimatum. Something like a clock ticked through me. It was not panic. It was a countdown to a different life than the one they had scripted. At dawn, the city peeled itself from the night. I showered, chose a charcoal suit that sharpened my shoulders, and tied my hair back so it would not fall into my face when I needed both hands free. I placed my pearl earrings in my ears. I opened my laptop and gathered the documents that told my side of the story. Bank statements, investment summaries, the most recent valuation of my company. I had not shown these to Daniel yet. I had kept my fortune as quiet as I kept my childhood scrapbook. It had felt private. It had felt safe. Now privacy felt like something else, like a curtain someone else could use to cast a shadow over me. Harold's office was a refuge of dark wood and neat files. He took the folder, read fast, and marked sections with small flags that looked like colorful warnings. He drew up a new document while I spoke, asking precise questions that kept me grounded. What do you want protected? What would you consider fair in the division of future assets? How do you define contribution to the marriage when both partners build and work and grow? His pen moved, his eyes narrowed, and line by line, something balanced took shape. He slid the draft to me before 9 and sat back. This protects your intellectual property and your company. It acknowledges your existing assets and his. It sets terms for shared acquisitions and for the length and depth of the marriage if it were ever to end. It is strict where it needs to be and merciful where it can be. You are not asking for advantage. You are asking for equality. I read it twice. The second time, the tension across my shoulders loosened a degree. There is one more thing, he said. How you present it matters as much as what it says. Do not let them herd you into their study or their timeline. Choose neutral ground. Bring documentation. Bring calm. The person who keeps her voice even is the person who holds the room. I smiled despite myself. You always say that. Because it is always true, he said. When I left his office, I texted Daniel. We need to meet at 1 at our usual place. No one else. He replied quickly. I will be there. At home, I placed the counter agreement into a clean folder with my name embossed in small gold letters on the corner. A gift from my grandfather the year I graduated. He had said that a person should know how to carry her work with quiet dignity. I slipped the financial statements behind the agreement. My hands did not shake. At 1, Daniel walked into the restaurant with his tie crooked and his eyes tired. He looked like the man I loved, not the heir to a legacy. He sat, reached for my hand, and pulled back when he saw my expression. I told him about the tea, from the invitation to the last echo of the ultimatum. I told him what I had read in the document, the parts that felt like traps laid over my work. He listened without interrupting, jaw tight, knuckles pale against the table. I did not know they would do it like that, he said when I finished. They spoke to me about a prenuptial agreement months ago, and I said I would handle it with you. Delayed. I can tell you I was protecting our peace, but the truth is simpler. I was afraid of this conversation and they used that fear. I slid our document to him. This is what I will sign. It is fair. It is balanced. It protects both of us, not just a crest carved over a gate. He read. His eyes moved with a concentration I first admired on a night when we had argued gently about school funding and what fairness looks like when it meets the real world. When he had finished, he nodded once. This makes sense. There is something else, I said. I opened the second folder and placed the statements between us. The numbers were not small. They told a story that would have changed the tea if it had been told earlier. He looked at me, then at the papers, then back at me. You kept this private, he said. He was not accusing. He was noticing. I did, I said. I wanted to be chosen for who I am, not for what I have. I did not know how to separate that from your world without hiding it for a while. He looked down again, a slow exhale leaving him, the kind that clears fog. Understand, he said. I wish I had earned the truth earlier. That is on me. We decided together on the next move. We would not return to the mansion with our heads bowed. We would ask for a private dining room at a place where voices echo just enough to remind people that their words can be heard. We would set the table with our version of fairness, our evidence, and the steadiness we had reclaimed. We would not go alone if we did not need to. Harold agreed to sit 2 tables away, not at our shoulders, but within the room if the air turned sharp. By late afternoon the plan had a spine. I could feel it when I stood in front of the mirror and fastened a simple chain at my throat. I chose a cream dress that read confident without turning hard. Daniel straightened his tie and, for once, did not try to make a joke to dissolve the weight in the room. He understood that this was not a moment that begged for ease. It begged for clarity. The driver pulled to the curb at Lakeview on the dot of 6. The facade caught the last light and threw it up toward the lake like a small offering. Inside, the host led us down a hallway lined with photographs of the shoreline in winter, quiet and silver. The private room waited with a table set for 4. Crystal glasses. Water already poured. Napkins folded with crisp corners. I placed our folder on the table and pressed a finger to the edge to square it. The door opened briefly as a server checked our preferences and then closed again. For a moment, there was only the low hum of the city beyond the glass and the steady beat of my heart. I did not feel small. I did not feel like someone who could be moved with a word. I felt like a woman who knew exactly where the line lived and what would happen if someone asked her to cross it. Outside the room, footsteps approached. One set measured, one set quick. The handles turned. The Whitmores were arriving, late by design, confident by habit, unaware of the weight waiting for them on the table in front of me. I reached for the glass, took a slow sip, and placed it down without a sound. The door opened. The air changed. I lifted my eyes and did not look away. They entered as if the room itself had been waiting for them. Charles stepped in first, his frame cutting a solid silhouette against the hallway light. Evelyn followed, her heels striking the polished floor in deliberate rhythm. She wore a deep burgundy dress, the kind that spoke of taste measured in generations, not seasons. Her diamond earrings caught the glow from the chandelier, throwing tiny shards of light across the walls. "Daniel, darling," she said, moving straight to her son and kissing the air beside his cheek. She didn't glance at me. Her voice carried the kind of charm that could coat steel. "What a lovely choice of venue. Though," her gaze finally flicked toward me, "I am still not sure why such formality is necessary. This is only a matter of a signature." Charles nodded at me in a way that was more acknowledgement than greeting. "We trust you have considered our proposal, Olivia." His tone made it sound less like a question and more like a statement of fact. Daniel gestured toward the seats across from us. "We've reviewed your agreement. It isn't acceptable." Charles's brows lifted. "Unacceptable. It's the same document both your siblings signed." Daniel's reply was steady. "They married people from families with wealth and power equal to ours. The circumstances aren't the same. The balance of power matters in these things." Evelyn exhaled through her nose, a refined dismissal. "This isn't a sociology lecture, Daniel. It's a legal precaution any prudent family would insist upon." I reached for my leather folder, opened it, and placed a single document in the center of the table. "We agree that legal protection is important," I said, keeping my voice level, "which is why we've prepared a prenuptial agreement that protects both parties equally." Charles's eyes narrowed slightly. "That wasn't the arrangement. You were to sign our document." "Plans change," I said, meeting his gaze directly. "Especially when new information comes to light." I slid the folder toward them. Evelyn's lips curved in what she clearly thought was a gracious smile. "Your software company hardly needs the same protection as the Whitmore legacy." I laid a set of financial statements on top of the document. "My current net worth is $9 million. $7.5 million in investments inherited from my grandfather, plus $1.5 million in company valuation from our most recent funding round." For a moment, the room was silent except for the faint clink of crystal as the server refreshed the water glasses. Evelyn's eyes flicked down to the numbers, then back to my face. Charles leaned forward, scanning the pages with the efficiency of someone trained to find flaws. He found none. That's unexpected, he said at last. Why keep this a secret? Evelyn's voice was tight, her smile gone. I met her eyes. Would you have treated me the same if you'd known? The faint color rising in her cheeks was answer enough. Charles cleared his throat. Well, this changes things. We'll need to review your proposal before we respond. That's fair, I said. Just as it would have been fair to give me time to review your original agreement with my own counsel. Evelyn's hands folded in her lap, fingers lacing and unlacing. Your grandfather left you $7 million, she asked finally. He lived modestly and invested wisely, I said. Not unlike the first Whitmore who built your fortune, I imagine. Daniel leaned forward. Mom, the issue isn't the existence of a prenup. It's the way this was handled. Springing it on Olivia 3 days before our wedding was disrespectful. We thought it best to resolve it quickly, Charles said, but his tone had softened. By threatening to cancel the wedding. Daniel's words hung in the air. Evelyn's gaze dropped to the table. We were protecting you. Protecting the family. What I understand, Daniel said, is that you made assumptions about the woman I love without knowing her. That ends now. Charles's attention returned to the document in front of him. Some of these terms are unusual, he admitted. They're fair, Daniel said. Unlike the original agreement. Charles tapped the paper once. We'll have our attorneys review this tomorrow morning. We can meet again in the afternoon. That works, I replied. As long as the balance remains intact. No reverting to one-sided terms. A subtle muscle worked in Charles's jaw. Then he nodded once. Understood. Evelyn looked between us, her voice quieter than before. I may have misjudged you, Olivia. Perhaps we all could have communicated more openly from the start, I said. Charles stood, extending his hand to me. You've proven yourself a formidable negotiator. The Whitmore family may benefit from that. I accepted the handshake. I look forward to contributing in many ways, Mr. Whitmore. Evelyn's farewell was clipped but absent of the thinly veiled condescension I had come to expect. They left the room together, the faint scent of Evelyn's perfume lingering in the air after the door closed. Daniel reached for my hand. You were incredible. We were, I corrected. His smile was real this time, no trace of tension in it. Together, he said. We walked out of Lakeview into the cooling evening air. The sky over the lake was streaked in gold and blue, the kind of light that makes you think the day might still hold something good. For the first time since that tea invitation, I believed it might. 2 days later, the morning of the wedding felt like stepping into a dream I had almost let slip away. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows of the bridal suite at the Drake Hotel, painting my dress in a glow so soft it seemed almost unreal. The sleek fabric hung ready, each seam and fold just as I had chosen it months ago. Jenna was fussing with the veil, her hands gentle but firm. You look like you already know you've won, she said, catching my eye in the mirror. It's not about winning, I told her quietly. It's about walking into that ceremony knowing I didn't bend just to keep the peace. Behind me, my mother was arranging the train with a precision that came from years of steady patience. Confidence, she said, glancing up at my reflection. My daughter finally stopped hiding her light. Before I could answer, there was a soft knock at the door. Marina, the hotel's event coordinator, stepped in. Mrs. Whitmore is here, she said. Jenna and my mother exchanged quick glances. Do you want us to stay? My mother asked. I shook my head. Give us a moment. They stepped out and the door clicked shut. Evelyn entered, alone. She had traded her usual bold, commanding presence for something softer. Pale blue silk that moved like water when she walked. Her hair swept back in a simple chignon. You make a beautiful bride, she said, her voice quieter than I'd ever heard it. Thank you, I replied, unsure where this was headed. She reached into the small clutch she carried and pulled out a velvet box. I brought you something, she said, offering it to me. I opened it slowly. Inside lay a pair of diamond and sapphire earrings, their deep blue centers catching the light in a way that seemed to hold stories. They belonged to Daniel's great-grandmother, Evelyn explained. She was the daughter of a factory worker who married into this family against fierce opposition. In the end, she was the one who kept the Whitmore business alive during the Depression. She had determination and skill that no one expected. The parallels were obvious, but Evelyn didn't press them. Instead, she looked at me in a way that held neither judgment nor calculation, just a quiet acknowledgement. "They're beautiful," I said sincerely. "Thank you for sharing them with me. Perhaps you might wear them today," she suggested. "Something old and something blue." I removed my pearl earrings and handed them to Jenna's empty chair, then let Evelyn fasten the sapphires in place. Her fingers were steady, cool against my skin. When she stepped back, there was something unguarded in her eyes. "I owe you an apology, Olivia. Not the half measure I gave at the restaurant. I judged you before I knew you. I let assumptions cloud my view, and I treated you in ways I shouldn't have. You didn't deserve that." "That can't have been easy to say," I replied. Her lips curved in a faint smile. "The Whitmores aren't known for admitting mistakes. But perhaps we can start a new tradition. I think moving forward is what matters now," I said. She nodded, drawing a slow breath as if steadying herself. "Welcome to the family. Truly." She left as quietly as she had come. When the door closed, I caught my reflection again in the mirror. The sapphires glinted under the soft light, carrying with them not just family history but the sense that a small bridge had been built where before there had only been distance. Minutes later, my father stepped in. His eyes softened the moment they landed on me. "My brilliant girl," he said, his voice thick. "Ready to start this new chapter?" "More than ready," I told him. The ceremony unfolded in a haze of light and warmth. The room was full, 200 guests, yet somehow it felt intimate when I saw Daniel at the end of the aisle. His expression as I walked toward him erased every shadow of the past week. We spoke our vows with steady voices, each word anchored in the storms we had already weathered together. Somewhere in the crowd, I caught the faintest glint of sapphires in Evelyn's ears, a mirror of my own, and I knew she had chosen them deliberately. At the reception, I noticed the change. People who had once spoken to me with polite detachment now leaned in with genuine interest. Richard introduced me to colleagues with a note of pride in his voice, emphasizing my work and success. Evelyn seated me beside her oldest friend, a federal judge whose approval clearly mattered to her. As Daniel and I swayed through our first dance, he leaned close, his voice just for me. "Amazing what 9 million can do for one's social standing." "It's not about the money," I said. "It's about respect." He smiled. "Maybe it's about both. Either way, I've never been prouder to call you my wife." The music rose around us, but my mind was clear. I knew we had crossed a line, not the one they had tried to force me over, but one we had chosen ourselves. A line that marked the beginning of something stronger, something entirely ours. Our honeymoon in the Greek islands felt like stepping out of time. For 2 weeks, the Whitmore name was just a name, and the only schedule we kept was the sun's. We wandered narrow stone streets lined with bougainvillea, shared grilled fish on terraces overlooking turquoise water, and let the wind carry away the tension of the past month. It was the first time in years I had seen Daniel without the subtle lines of calculation around his eyes. There was no boardroom, no courtroom, no family council. Just him and me, the salt in the air, and the slow rhythm of waves against the shore. We talked about the future in the easy way you talk when there is no one listening but the sea. Where we would live. How we would blend our work with the life we wanted. How we would keep the boundaries we'd set with his parents, so they wouldn't dissolve under the weight of tradition. 6 months later, we were back in Seattle, living in the condo we had chosen together before the engagement turned into a battlefield. The city felt like ours now, not just mine. The morning light streamed across the open kitchen where Daniel made coffee while I scanned emails from my team. My company had just secured a major contract with a school district, one that would bring our software into hundreds of classrooms. That was when Evelyn started calling. Not every day, but often enough that I noticed the pattern. She never came right out and asked for more time together, but she dropped hints about the family tradition of Sunday dinners, and how wonderful it would be to keep it going. The first time she mentioned it, I let it slide. The second time, I reminded her we were busy with work. The third time, I felt the familiar pressure of the old Whitmore expectations pressing in. That evening, over a quiet dinner at home, I told Daniel. She wants us there every week, I said. And I think she expects us to fall in line without discussion. He put down his fork. Once a month, he said, no hesitation. We need our own traditions. Our own time. It was the first time I realized he wasn't just agreeing with me. He had already drawn his own line in the sand. The next morning he called her. I didn't hear every word, but I could tell from his tone that he was being firm. Later, he told me she had agreed without much resistance. Maybe it was the prenup negotiations still echoing in her mind. Maybe she simply knew that pushing would only make us push back harder. Richard surprised me in quieter ways. When his law firm began a major technology upgrade, he asked if I would consult. He didn't phrase it as a favor to the family. He called it a professional engagement, and he listened when I laid out my recommendations. When the school district contract was finalized, he sent me a handwritten note, just a few lines but warm and respectful. I kept it in the top drawer of my desk, not because I needed the approval, but because it reminded me how far we had come. We began looking for a house the same month. Not in the Whitmore neighborhood, and not in my old part of town. Somewhere that was neither his world nor mine, but ours. We found it on a quiet street lined with old maples, wide windows, a kitchen that opened to the garden, and an office for each of us. We bought it together, signing the papers side by side, our names written in the same ink. The prenup that had once been a weapon against me now sat in a safe deposit box, its real value in the balance it had forced us to create. Sometimes I thought back to that day at the estate, the leather folder on the table, the weight of their stares. They had been so sure they knew who I was. Now, months later, they treated me not as an outsider allowed into their circle, but as someone who stood on her own ground. It wasn't perfect. Never would be. But the difference was clear in every handshake, every conversation, every choice that was ours to make. We had built a foundation that could hold, not because we avoided the storms, but because we had faced them head-on and refused to be moved. The shift in the Whitmore dynamic didn't erase the undercurrents, it just changed their direction. By late autumn, the air in Seattle carried that damp chill that seeps into your bones, and the leaves along the streets had turned to deep gold. Business at my company was brisk. We were preparing for a winter release of new features that could double our user base. Daniel's schedule at the firm was just as demanding. That was when Evelyn called me directly, not Daniel. Her voice was polite, almost warm, but I caught the faint thread of calculation under it. "Olivia," she said, "there's a benefit gala next month for the Northwest Cultural Trust. It's one of the most important events of the season. We're hosting a private table. You and Daniel must join us." I glanced at my calendar. The gala fell on the same weekend as a retreat I'd planned with my senior team. A trip months in the making, crucial for planning our next expansion. "We already have commitments that weekend," I said evenly. There was a beat of silence, the kind that always felt like a test. "This event is significant for the family's profile," she replied. "I understand," I said, "and my work is significant for mine. I can't cancel on my team." When I hung up, I half expected Daniel to suggest we reschedule my retreat. Instead, when I told him, he leaned back in his chair and let out a slow breath. "You're right. We can't be everywhere they expect us to be. I'll go to the gala, represent the family, and you'll lead your retreat." It was a small thing on the surface, but it told me everything I needed to know. He wasn't just defending me when I was in the room. He was standing by my side even when our paths had to split. The retreat went flawlessly. We stayed in a converted lodge tucked into the Cascades. Mornings spent around a roaring fireplace with laptops open and coffee cups steaming. Afternoons walking forest trails while ideas flowed faster than any boardroom meeting could manage. On the last night, I got a message from Daniel. "The gala's over. Your absence was noted. But I told them you were doing something important, and they didn't argue." I could almost hear the edge of pride in his voice, and it warmed me in a way the fire couldn't. When I returned to Seattle, Richard invited us to dinner. Just the four of us. I braced myself for a post-gala lecture, but it never came. Instead, we talked about the legal implications of new tech privacy laws, about the latest funding changes for public education. Evelyn even asked a few thoughtful questions about my company's work, listening without the patronizing smile she'd worn in our early meetings. Later, as Daniel and I walked to the car, he glanced at me with a small smile. "They're learning. They're trying," I corrected. But I knew the truth. Each time I held my ground without hostility, each time Daniel backed me without hesitation, we were redrawing the map. And every new line we drew made it harder for anyone to erase where we stood. Winter settled over Seattle like a heavy quilt, muffling the city in damp gray. The Whitmore estate, with its high stone walls and manicured gardens, looked almost softer under the blanket of frost. We hadn't been there in weeks by design. Once-a-month dinners were our agreement, and Daniel and I kept that boundary without fail. The January visit was quiet at first. Evelyn greeting us at the door, Charles offering a firm handshake, the staff moving with practiced discretion. We sat in the formal dining room, the long mahogany table gleaming under the chandelier. The air smelled faintly of rosemary and roasted lamb. Halfway through the main course, Charles cleared his throat. "Olivia," he began, "we've been approached about a partnership between our firm and a tech company developing educational compliance software. I wondered if you'd consider consulting on their proposal." I set down my fork. It was the first time he'd directly asked for my input on a professional matter. "I'd be happy to look over the details," I said. He nodded, almost as if committing it to memory. "I'll have our team send over the documents." Evelyn remained quiet through most of dinner, but her eyes studied me in that deliberate way of hers, less guarded now, more curious. When dessert arrived, she finally spoke. "I heard about the district-wide rollout your company completed last month. That's impressive, Olivia." "Thank you," I said, holding her gaze. "It was a lot of work, but worth it." Her lips curved just slightly. "I imagine it was." When the meal ended, Daniel excused himself to take a call, leaving me alone with her in the drawing room. The fire crackled softly between us. "You're different than I expected," she said after a moment. "How so?" Her gaze drifted to the flames. "I thought you'd try to fit into our world. But you've held your own without trying to become one of us." I took a slow sip of my tea. "I don't think marriage should mean disappearing into someone else's shadow. Not mine. Not Daniel's." For once, there was no trace of defensiveness in her expression. That's not a lesson many women in this family have taught their husbands. We sat in companionable silence until Daniel returned. That quiet, more than any speech or agreement, told me something had shifted. Not just in her view of me but in how I existed in that house. On the drive home, Daniel glanced over at me, one hand resting lightly on the wheel. "You didn't say much after dessert." "Sometimes," I said, watching the city lights pass by, "silence says exactly what you want it to." He smiled faintly, and neither of us needed to add more. Some battles are won in the moments where no one raises their voice, and in that old house I just won one. By early spring, the city had shaken off the last of the winter frost, and with it came a new flurry of Whitmore obligations. Daniel's cousin was getting married, an elaborate affair planned for the family's coastal estate, a sprawling property that looked more like a private resort than a home. From the moment the invitation arrived, Evelyn's calls began. Not hostile, not even insistent, just constant, each one layered with gentle suggestions. What Daniel should wear, where we should stay, how I might blend into the theme with a dress in soft pastels. At first, I let her words pass over me like wind against glass. But by the third call, something in her tone sharpened. "You do understand," she said one afternoon, "that appearances matter at this wedding. There will be people." "I understand," I replied. "But I'll choose my own dress, Evelyn." She hesitated just long enough for the silence to turn cold. "Of course," she said finally, the word bending slightly before she hung up. When I told Daniel that evening, he sighed. "This is how she tests people. She frames control as guidance, and when you push back, she makes it about loyalty." The wedding weekend arrived with clear skies and the kind of ocean breeze that carried salt into every open window. The estate was buzzing with staff, family, and an endless parade of guests in tailored suits and flowing gowns. Evelyn's eyes found me the moment we entered the reception hall. She took in my deep emerald dress, elegant, sleek, and nothing like the pastel she'd suggested. Her smile was polite but strained, the muscles just below her cheekbones tightening. Yet she said nothing. Instead, she introduced me to a pair of investors in hushed, reverent tones, mentioning my company's latest expansion as if she'd been championing it all along. The irony wasn't lost on me. Later, as the night deepened and the music softened, Daniel found me on the balcony overlooking the water. "She's not going to say anything about the dress," he murmured. "Because she knows it's not worth the fight," I said. He nodded toward the dance floor inside. "She's learning the rules have changed." Still, as I watched her laugh with a group of guests, I knew something else was true. Old patterns don't vanish overnight. They wait for cracks in the foundation, for moments of distraction. The difference now was that I could see them coming, and I no longer felt the need to brace. Somewhere beneath the hum of music and the crash of distant waves, I understood that these small tests were not just about me. They were about whether this new version of our relationship could hold against the weight of history. And for the first time, I was certain it could. The weeks after the wedding on the coast passed in a blur of work deadlines and late nights at both my office and Daniel's firm. We had learned to protect our own rhythm. Weekday dinners together whenever we could manage, long walks through the city on Sunday mornings, quiet conversations about our next goals. Then one Tuesday evening, just as I was shutting down my laptop, I saw a message from Richard. "Can you stop by the firm tomorrow? Confidential matter." When I arrived, he ushered me into his corner office. The blinds were half drawn against the afternoon glare, and a stack of thick files sat neatly on his desk. "We're considering a major contract with the district court system," he said. "They want to integrate an educational platform into rehabilitation programs for youth offenders. Your company's software is on the shortlist." I sat across from him, the words settling slowly. "And you want my input?" He shook his head. "I want your expertise. I also want the board to see you as the person you are, not just my son's wife." It was the first time he had separated me from the family title, at least in how he addressed me. We talked for over an hour, about infrastructure, data security, user training, the scalability of implementation. He listened carefully, asked pointed questions, and took notes. When we finished, he closed the folder and said simply, "You've given us more in an hour than the other firms have in a month." As I stood to leave, Evelyn appeared at the doorway. She looked from me to the open folder on Richard's desk. "Was this the court project?" "Yes," Richard said, his tone even. "Olivia's input will be critical if we want to secure it." For a flicker of a moment, Evelyn's gaze softened. "I see." She stepped into the office and glanced at me. "Then I suppose we'll need to start talking about how to present you at the board meeting." It wasn't an embrace, but it was an opening, and I knew enough to recognize when to step into one. By the time I left the firm that day, I understood something had shifted again, not because of another confrontation, but because of what happens when respect grows in quiet corners. The Whitmores valued influence and legacy. I had begun building both in their world, not by force, but by showing I could add to it without losing myself. Daniel noticed it too. That night, as we sat in the glow of our living room, he said, "They're starting to see you as more than my wife." "Good," I replied. "Because I was never only that." He smiled, and for the first time I felt not just accepted in the Whitmore circle, but positioned beside Daniel as an equal force, an unspoken alliance that was no longer just between the two of us. It was beginning to extend outward, reshaping the family itself. Spring gave way to the first warm days of summer, and with it came the quiet certainty that the storm we had weathered months ago had left something stronger in its place. The Whitmore name no longer felt like a weight pressing down on me. It was simply a fact, like the view from our kitchen window or the way Daniel's hand fit over mine when we walked through the city. The district court project went through, and the firm announced the partnership in the same breath as they credited my company for its success. At the board meeting, Evelyn introduced me with the kind of poise usually reserved for her oldest allies. I caught her eye as I stepped to the podium and saw something I hadn't seen before, pride that wasn't tinged with reservation. After the meeting, she approached me. "You've built something that stands on its own," she said quietly. "It's admirable." "Thank you," I replied, and this time the words didn't carry the weight of an unspoken battle. At home that night, Daniel opened a bottle of wine, the kind we saved for moments that mattered. We sat on the back porch, the air warm and still, the garden lights casting soft halos against the ground. "You know," he said, swirling his glass, "there was a time when I thought we'd just have to endure my parents' ways until they eased up. But you," he looked at me, his voice steady, "you changed the rules. And not just for us." I thought of the sapphire earrings resting in my jewelry box, the way they had felt that morning when Evelyn fastened them in my ears. "Maybe," I said, "but we both stood our ground. That's why it worked." We fell into a comfortable silence, the kind that holds more than words. I could hear the faint hum of the city beyond our street, the rhythm of a life that was wholly ours. Months earlier, I had walked out of the Whitmore estate with a leather folder in my hands and the sharp knowledge that I was being underestimated. Now I sat beside the man I loved, in a home we chose together, with a marriage built on terms we had written ourselves. If I had signed that one-sided agreement to keep the peace, maybe things would have been easier in the short term. But ease had never been the point. Respect had. Equality had. Truth had. And as the night settled around us, I knew beyond any doubt that standing my ground, revealing my worth on my own terms, was a choice I would make again in a heartbeat.